Okay, start over. No, I'm just kidding. So I guess tell us what I know you said the kind of the running and the competitive stuff kind of got you interested in the sports field. What kind of changed you from the physical aspect to the more of the coaching, health, and wellness aspect of it?
Life, I think, for me, I'm a student at heart, and recognizing that everyone learns a little bit differently. So I have a child who has dyslexia, and so I see kind of how they approach teaching, not not similar to coaching, where you're kind of meeting the individual or the student where they are. And so it's just a natural transition of, taking that passion for sports, health promotion, wellness, and applying it to others. And a lot of times, coaches come with that serving heart where they want to meet people where they're at, help them transition, and recognize that even those skills, we're self-coaching in a way, and we're meeting ourselves where we're at. So it's that same principle.
I like that. I actually haven't thought of it in that way, meeting ourselves where we're at. That's actually a very good point. All right. I guess on my end, I've got a few questions, but I'm gonna open it up to the group first and see what kind of questions they have for you. Dive in, group. Suck up all the knowledge.
Nice meeting you, Patricia. My name is Shade. I live in Lagos, and I'm just getting into the groove of coaching. And this is my first official course. I I want to ask you, how do you navigate the challenges of the coaching industry? If you go on the social media, there's so many different coaches out there, and it could be quite inundating. So how do you really streamline what area of coaching you really want to go into, that will make impact to people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's kind of two-pronged. I mean, from an entrepreneurial aspect, they'll encourage you to niche into an area of specialization. But if you're new to it and you don't really know, then I kind of started where you teach a little bit broader so that like, yes, I like this, no, I don't like that. So depending on your specialty might be, or areas of interest, you can
I think we lost you.
dive
Yeah,
into
Patricia,
a
she's
broader
correct.
range initially.
Oh, sorry, you
Am I
froze there
glitching?
for a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me put my hotspot on and
Okay.
maybe come back.
No problem.
Your specialty might be initially, and that kind of out of. If I take off my video, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
A lot better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to leave my video off, just hoping if it is, then just Haley or somebody put your hands up and say, stop, because I can see you guys. It was a great question. I was basically saying that, to maybe quiet the noise if it's overwhelming, but then also don't be afraid to explore, especially as it's new, because that's where I and lots of people gain the what I like, what I don't like. So if you have an area specialization that you're interested in and you're new to it, you're going to explore it more. And then that helps us weed out or navigate towards, that area of interest that we enjoy. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but if that kind of helps. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Because sometimes you see all sorts of coaches online and they're all saying different things, you know, and then you're thinking to yourself, how am I going to jump into this big ocean, you know? But yeah.
Well,
It's
and a
okay.
lot of times, you know, the oceans that we're swimming in, because we're healthcare providers, our news feed, especially in social media, gets flooded with more of the same. But in actuality, there's so many individuals who don't have access to the areas of, you know, interest that show up on our feed. So it might just be a matter of, you know, bridging, you know, like, just as an example, you know, health with, sewing. Like if someone had an interest in sewing, you're gonna focus more interest in sewing, and then those people, you know, naturally have health interests that you can step in and help them as a coach. So, you know, you're probably getting a lot of social media flooding because you're liking things that speak to your current area of interest. But if you broaden out and kind of look at other areas such as sewing or dog walking or, you know, whatever it happens to be, you're going to find that it's not quite as noisy.
Thank you.
Like dog walking. Put that on my.
I have a dog. He's lovely. He doesn't do much walking. He's getting heavier and heavier. So
Story of my life.
yeah.
Charlie, looks like you had the question.
Well, I know Nicole had one. I was just going to make sure that we went back to hers unless that answered it. That was all I was going to check on.
No, mine's a completely different topic.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, so I guess my understanding is with your history of being an elite athlete and kind of doing that really disciplined activity of marathoning, have you worked a lot with others that are very disciplined in their sport and wellness in that arena, I guess?
Less so as a coach. So I did not choose to go towards, you know, coaching specifically for, you know, the disciplined athlete population. So mine's more general population. Is that something that you're interested in or background?
Not exactly. I was just very curious how coaching works with a very disciplined person. Like, how do you still find a way to be useful to that client when they tend to be so disciplined already? If that's kind of, because you will get people, I know even Margaret was talking about doing like executive coaching, which those are high performers. So like, you know, we've talked a lot about wellness and like baby steps, and a lot of these, you know, when you're talking about, you know, maybe somebody who just got a diagnosis for a disease that maybe is, you know, somewhat because of bad healthy lifestyles, that they don't really quite have that concept of this is what healthy lifestyle looks like. But then when you go to the extreme other end of that spectrum and you have somebody who I definitely think can benefit from coaching in a way, but like how does that look so different when and like have some legitimacy for somebody who is so incredibly disciplined for things like marathoning and that like that type of community or type of person, I guess.
Yeah. And if I get glitchy, I'll turn my video off again. I just, yeah, glitching again. Can you hear me? Okay. Wave at me if I, I apologize. Air that's in a silo. So they're probably applying those strengths. Not working.
There you
Okay.
go. Thank you.
Okay. They're probably applying strengths that they have into the silo of, you know, sports performance or executive CEO level, C-suite type performance, but they may not be applying it to, you know, that new diagnoses, and they need some help, taking those skill sets and applying it to a new area. Or they may need to, help in looking at different baskets. If you look at wellness holistically, you're going to have relationship baskets, health and fitness or sports performance baskets, maybe entrepreneurial or financial baskets, or whatever rock that they want to work on. So you're going to try to, coach highlighting their attributes or their strengths, and then, helping them transition those strengths into whatever area. They're human just like us. And sometimes it's, they're so dedicated in one area that other areas are where they're kind of falling apart and where they need that help. I hear my
Sound like a
voice
little
squeaking.
chipmunk was talking over you there for a second. You're good though. All right.
How does that sound, Nicole?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think my understanding of some elite athletes is that you're right, they do neglect other areas of their overall wellness because they're so rigid and focused on that athletic performance, whatever that might be. And so there are areas of weakness in which there's room to work. And that makes sense that you would just start working on the areas that need work, not just, but yeah. So I guess that kind of answered my question in the sense that I'm thinking about like just the whole person. There's always room for something to be worked on.
Yeah, sometimes they're going to rise, sometimes they're looking for that edge within that silo that they're already doing really well. And that's when you can, take them beyond, eat your green vegetable kind of level, hydrate kind of stuff. And it's really getting specific to that silo as well, which a lot of coaches do, travel down that road as well, where they're helping them with ultimate sports performance. Maybe they're a physique athlete or, getting ready for a stage or an event. And there's coaching around that silo as well as broadening it out. So.
Very good insight. All right, what else you got?
I was going to say, did that answer your question, Nicole?
Yeah, I think it all makes sense. I just needed to process because my thought is like, well, why would an elite athlete need coaching? They're already so disciplined. But yeah, they still there's statistics that they actually neglect relationships and other things because they're so disciplined. So it makes sense that there would still be an area of coaching in which that isn't just health and wellness, but like the wellness part, not exactly the health, like your physical body situation, but more of like the relationship side of it.
Yeah, I'll just add on to this is typically there is a high divorce rate with high performers, always, right? You look at physicians, you look at athletes, you look at anybody that's a high performer, you look at executives, suicide rates are higher. So obviously they're neglecting something. They might be a high performer, but like you said, the research shows and ultimately, one of the bigger things that people never think about with high performers is the suicide rate and the mental health side of things that come along with high performing. And even whenever you have that first failure or that first perception of failure, maybe is a better way to say it, and then they have to handle that, it's very tough. So I think working with high performers, maybe that the approach is almost like Patricia said, was, you're working with the high performing aspect of it. But, that personal health inventory or that whole health inventory, whatever y'all end up using, really starts to open up the conversation about those social things, right? And then using those motivational interviewing skills to say, well, why is that important to you? And, getting into the weeds of that, I think will open up the door. And I think we've mentioned this before too, is a lot of folks have no idea what they're coming to coaching for. And it's up to you to also facilitate that conversation in a meaningful way for that client. Which I think is also powerful for us to do, and taking that look from that that immediate look of they're here for a high performing thing, what athletes are, they're here to further their leadership skills or whatever it is. And those are the things that starts the conversation, but it's the broader conversations that makes us health and wellness coaches and makes us different than the rest of the field. So anyway, I just wanted to add that piece on there. Sorry.
Oh, good addition. All right. What other questions you guys have? Good job so far. These are good questions.
If nobody has one, I had one. And this one's probably more to do with, these folks are getting ready to take these coaching skills out into the real world. But more importantly, beyond that, I know you've talked a little bit about entrepreneurship and kind of narrow down what your target, maybe not target population, but kind of what it is target population. You're narrowing down that target population. I guess really, is there a way for your private practice? Was there a way, maybe not the population itself, but was there a way that you approached your business structure and those types of things in a meaningful way to help gain clarity, also for peace of mind of you that your company's taken care of, you're moving in the right direction? I guess really, what was your approach in starting that private practice and kind of thinking forward of this is how I'm going to grow my clientele, things like that? Because I think that might be meaningful for these folks too, from a private practice standpoint. But anyway, I don't know if you had any insights on that.
Yeah. I'm two things that come to mind. First is the niche itself for the selection. I'm not sure that there's necessarily a more meaningful way other than I feel, like a lot of times, you'll start broader and then you just kind of naturally narrow, not necessarily out of necessity, but you're trying to streamline processes. So when you serve everyone, it's like you learn to be conscientious with your resources, some of which is time, energy, money, connections that you have. So don't, your network of individuals and stuff. So you need to weigh those types of decisions, along with your own personal interests. The other thing just with entrepreneurial is that you're layering in the business aspect, which is separate from coaching. So, it's a different beast or a different, hierarchy of things that you need to consider that you didn't know that you needed to know. I do a lot of stuff online, which is great since, we have Zoom and we can meet with individuals across the pond and all the different time zones and stuff. But being able to use that technology and be able to set it up or have resources to have individuals help set it up, looking at aspects of, banking or scope of practice or, legalities and things like that. So it's multi-layered. So I don't know that there's an answer that's coming to me that helps out, but those are things that, top of mind hit me with that question.
No, that's a good point. The things that you don't know getting into business. And I know like Margaret starting her business, one thing that I mentioned to her as she was setting it up was, well, you got to trademark your name, because if you don't trademark it, then somebody legally could take your name and there's nothing you can do about it. And then she was like, well, man, there goes something else I got to worry about, right? It's all the little nuances as you go through it. And those pieces are always tough. So, and then you don't know what you don't know until either somebody tells you or you're hit in the face with it.
Yeah. And at the same time, don't be scared to just go ahead and, go down the avenue. Same thing that we tell our clients, what can I learn from the experience, the highs and the lows? If there happens to be a low, what learning can I have? If someone trademarked my name and I can't use it, what's my plan B, C, D, E? And just know that we get knocked down 7 times and we get up the 8th time. So it's about resilience, grit, which I know that you've probably had lots of lessons on that resilience and grit. And it's the same thing with business as it is with coaching. So yeah.
Well, now I feel like we're just having a conversation, but if anybody wants to chime in, you know, because you just said something about the grit. You know, one thing that we did do is we did a grit assessment. We talked about grit one day and did those types of things. And even talking about grit, you know, you can use that a grit assessment as you're looking into this, as you're coming up on those challenges, right? Is now you have a tool that can help you overcome those challenges, or know what those challenges are. I shouldn't say overcome it, because the tool's not going to help you do it, but it'll show you, hey, I hate reaching out to people. I see on this grit scale, I'm not a communicator, right? So now you know on social media, you're gonna have a barrier. So partner with somebody there, right? So another thing with these strength finders and everything that we've done in this course, you have assessments that give you guidance on how you could approach your business too. And again, we have no idea what you're going to do with your business. And we could probably go over nuances of different things, but a lot of it we probably don't even know. And we've started businesses in the past. But I think the biggest piece, and I'll use this, and I know a lot of people here, I don't know if Brian's was able to join or not. But you know, there's a lot of military resources out there for veterans who are starting businesses, and there's a lot of resources out there for women. Because I think Brian was the only other male participant we had, but women-owned businesses. Like if you get a certificate as a woman-owned business, and I would highly recommend that you do if you become your own business. There's all kinds of benefits. There's resources out there for you, and they will help you get all those things set up. So what I will say, and what I was trying to get at was, I went through a military entrepreneurial training, and one thing that they said is the likelihood that your small business will be in business 5 years from the time you start it up is less than 30%, right? But then you start adding the people who follow through and take one step in front of the other is really all that they have to do. And the grit and resilience is really all about it, much like she was just saying. If a name pops up and you can't have that name, right, you just change names, right? You keep going. If your logo are the colors that you don't want, but it was the cheapest logo and the only thing you can afford, you move forward, right? And you keep doing those types of things as you move forward, and you learn, take notes of it, right? And then continue to build, because it will be the resilience that gets you through that 5-year hump. Now, I'll say businesses who make it to that 5-year mark that stay in business beyond that, I forget what the number is, but you know, it's like over 70%, right? So you automatically increase once you get to that 5-year mark, your chances of staying in business by something like 40-some%, just automatically by showing up, right? So again, you got to make it to that 5-year mark, and it's the resilience and the grit. It's whenever something falls apart, it's the ebbs and flows of a private practice of you're sitting here and you hadn't had a new client come in the past month and a half. and you're like, I got to give up, right? Oh no, I got to stop. And instead you keep going, right? You go back out, you advertise, you get back to social media, you do those things. And those are the people who will still be in business 5 years from now, and potentially 10, 15, 20 years from now. So anyway, sorry, that probably went on.
No, I love it. And it's definitely the simple plus consistency that's, that lets individuals get to that, 5-year mark or beyond. And also the self regulation, that's going to be key, so that if you can, learn to self regulate, know when you're optimal. Todd or Charlie had mentioned knowing yourself. Do you like to be on social media or not? Well, maybe you're not in front of the camera person, but maybe your avenue is to write blog kind of, maybe that's where you shine, being able to put it on paper. So knowing yourself and then being able to self-regulate is going to be key for any entrepreneurial, even coaching, being able to, when you're discussing something heavy, and to be able to be like, ooh, I feel something coming up for me in this scenario. How am I going to get myself through it? So, yeah.
And I'll add on that, the way you can get through it is the people that are in this course and the people on this call right now, right? I will say, in my opinion, the coaching field is probably some of the most helping field, but helping each other. I mean, not just helping their clients, but helping one another and then wanting to work with each other. And I'll say, if you run across somebody who doesn't want to help you out and they're not willing to talk about business ideas and things like that, they're probably not the best person to be talking to. Because in my experience, y'all know I'm a social worker. I've been in executive leadership positions. I've done different things. And in my opinion, this is the one field to where you can almost reach out to anybody and say, hey, I got a question. And it could almost be direct competition with that person, and they're still going to give you the answer. Whereas most fields, they don't do that, right? It's a huge competition. So lean on the fields, lean on these Facebook groups, lean on LinkedIn groups. I mean, I still go in and ask questions on some of those, right? And I still keep in touch with some people too. So anyway, I just want to add that piece in there because I think that is huge, is we are in one field that is growing. And I think Todd said it maybe the last session or the session before that we had, is this is still a new field. We are the experts. We are the ground people, right? There might have been some people before us, but at the end of the day, this is turning into implementation phase, and we are the experts in this, right? As the field grows even more, and a year from now, I forget how many we have now, but let's say in a year from now, it's grown 150% in the field. We were the ones that were there 150% ago, right? Like, people will be looking to us for answers and how we're growing this field and how we're doing things. So another thing to think about as you're going through this and you feel like I'm not the expert in this, you are the expert, right? Just over 10,000 right now of coaches, Todd said, right? So, that's pretty small for a discipline that's also now getting ready to be reimbursable through Medicare, right? You look at a social work field, you look at a physician field, you look at anything else that's already reimbursable, and there's hundreds of thousands of those disciplines in those fields. Right now, we're at 10,000. So 10,000 people, out of 10,000 people, in 5 years from now, whenever our field grows to be over 100,000 certified coaches, y'all were one of the first 10,000 coaches, right? I mean, keep that in mind as you're growing and building this. Like, we're all learning as we grow, but by God, in 5 years, y'all are going to be the subject matter experts whenever this field grows to be 100,000 or 150,000, 200,000 clinicians or coaches nationwide. People are going to be looking at you all, and you might be on a panel talking about, man, whenever I was so scared, whenever I was sitting on a panel thinking about my business and, man, how I'm going to fumble and mess this up, and you'll be able to really talk people through that. Anyway, I just want to also harp on that, is we are still a young field, but it is a field that is growing and moving in the right direction, because that Medicare reimbursement, the health savings account reimbursement, all those things are going to lead to more avenues for reimbursement in the future, meaning other insurance companies. If it's not insurance companies, it'll be employers. It'll be somebody, because the value's being seen. Anyway, I'll stop there on that and see if anybody has any other questions or comments or anything.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm learning a whole lot this afternoon. Thank you for all the wonderful points. One key thing is resilience. You just have to keep going. You can't afford to give up. And I know that, the future is bright. I wanted to ask this question. At what point do you really think you want to start your own business? I'm thinking, it's my first course. I want to do the exam and get certified. I want to get the experience. At what point do you really think you're ready to go on your own and start your own business or start your own practice? What would give you that nudge that, okay, I'm all set to go solo? How do you get to that point in this industry?
I don't know if that question was for me or Patricia, but I'll take the first stab at it. And I feel like y'all probably know me enough by now, and I know Haley laughed the moment that she said that, or that you asked that, because for my answer to you will be, there's no better time than right now, right? You should be, this is something else that I'll tell you. Sade, you had a master's in counseling, right? Is that right? So the first time you counseled somebody, were you ready that day that you did it on your own, independent, probably not a supervisor anymore, not anything? Were you ready that day?
Maybe I was 50% ready. I was still very scared, but I went for it.
That's right. That's right. So that's what I'll leave you with is, if you wait until you think you're 100% ready, it'll be too late. If you wait until you think you're 80% ready, more than likely it's going to be too late. And in my opinion, there's no better time to start than right now. And like I said before, you have the resources of us, right? Like, I know some of y'all may not know this, but literally I just popped up a business within a week, and got it Medicare approved. We are going through the credentialing process with coaches, and I have no freaking idea what I'm doing, Sade. Um, I don't want to make it sound like I do. It may sound like I do because I'm still moving forward and I have an idea, but a vision is only as good as the actions that you're willing to put behind it. And if you wait until that vision is ready, that you're ready to put action behind it, that vision has changed, right? So there's no better time than today. And to start a website and move one foot in front of the other. One thing that I was going to say is you kind of were talking to something that I forgot to mention whenever I was talking about Brian being here, being a military person. The reason why people pump so much money into service disabled veteran owned businesses in the federal government is because those businesses are more successful than any other small businesses. Why? In my opinion, is because military really knows how to step one foot in front of the other and keep going. Whenever they're hit with, that name change, right? Nicole just stole my name and she's running her own business. She's now ran off and doing whatever over here. Um, um, the resiliency that the military has tends to be able to be like, all right, well, whatever, I'll just call it, revenge on Nicole Day is what it's going to be. And then I'm going to call my business that, right? And um, so again, I think it's really knowing yourself. So I say there's no better time than today. You also need to know yourself, right? You also need to know that you got those prepared things. If you do not want to be on social media, then you got that person that's going to be that. And if you're not doing that, then you got the plan. I would imagine y'all haven't. If y'all have followed anything on the wellness effect, you never seen my face on the wellness effect unless it was a picture, right? I wasn't doing videos. I wasn't doing anything. But I'll tell you, we grew our LinkedIn account to astronomical numbers, and we never posted a thing about our videos, our faces in it, right? So I say astronomical numbers. It's like 1,600, but that's still really good for a business that's only been in effect for, less than a year, and a name. So I'll say we can definitely talk about it, and I'll say Sade and anybody else on here that's struggling with that start date is, again, there's no better time than today. Don't be afraid, and just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And then whenever you feel like it, that you feel that pit in your stomach, like I have no freaking idea what I am doing. Remember that is 100% what every other entrepreneur started. And even if you think about your past times of seeing that first counseling patient on your own without supervision, without anybody, without nothing, how scared, and how even whenever you felt like you were doing good and then you're doing good and then you get that patient who just wasn't listening, wasn't doing anything, and then it makes you just slam right back down and feel horrible again, right? You've already been through it. So I think the time is now. Anyway. I'll stop there and let anybody else chime in.
Yeah. I'm glad I'm sitting in on the conversation. So we all need to hear this. We're all in the same journey. I'd say, the clarity comes with the action. So, take today's action and then tomorrow, take tomorrow's action. And that goes back to that consistency. So your vision is going to expand, so if you have a small desire to go out on your own, and do your entrepreneurial pursuit, then take the action. Just, what's today's action step? If social media, like social media is so in our face right now, but I would also not, recommend look at your local network as well. So there are lots of opportunities, 100-mile radius from each of your house where you can tap into what you need. And then kind of like a story that goes with, the journey. Story that goes with, Am I reverberating? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
I just want to make sure I'm getting echoey. you know, like the stages for, and I'm sure that you guys have, you know, kind of discussed this in some manner, but you can equate it to bike riding. So we're all going through the same stages of unconscious incompetence. We don't know what we don't know. So we're riding the bike. We see our big brother riding the bike. Hey, I want to get on the bike. I want to learn how to ride that. That looks really fun. But when you get on it, you don't know what the heck you're doing getting on the bike. And then you kind of transition into the conscious incompetence, conscious incompetence stage, where it's like, you know, I kind of pedal, I got to shift my weight, you know, but if I, you know, as soon as I don't think about it, I'm falling and skinning my knees. So it's the same thing with our business. And then we get into conscious competence where we're, hey, mom, look at me, I can ride. And she's like, great, great. But as soon as we take our attention off of it, then we're, you know, wobbly on our bike, or wobbly in our business, or wobbly in our coaching skills. So, you know, we've learned a lot. We know how to apply our new coaching skills, but we got to think about it. And then we become master coaches when we become unconsciously competent. We no longer have to think about it, and it just comes second nature to us. And it's, you know, the basketball player who's doing it, the business owner, CEO, who's just doing it innately. And then they have to kind of come back and think, how am I going to teach the next generation this skill set? So, you know, you're going to go through that same skill, that same transition, and you're going to cycle through it. So just clarity comes with action. So, yeah.
Stages of change. I heard out of that.
Yeah, I think all this business talk, I have the exact same feelings of like very overwhelmed, but I think going back to thinking about what it takes to have a growth mindset, I just have to keep reminding myself, I can learn anything. I can learn the next step. I can learn it. You just always have to have that growth mindset of like, we can do the next thing. And if we don't know how to do it, we just figure it out. We learn it.
And as Charlie pointed out, rely on your network, because especially when you're sitting in your four walls at home and you're looking at a screen, it's easy to get sucked into whatever that mindset is that, you know, the isolation brings. So make sure that you're tapping into a network that's supportive, which is often other coaches, other coaching growth networks.
Yeah, and I'll add to that is, if you're planning on starting a private practice on your own, you know, your own clientele, you're on an island, you know, and if you're not intentionally doing some type of social networking, or maybe not social networking, just colleague networking, I won't say you'll go crazy, because that's probably pretty definitive, but you know, it's, if you don't have interaction and you're on your own, and you have those issues and you need to talk to a colleague, even if it's just talking to a colleague. I have my door open, so I don't want to talk about it, but you know, even if it's about the bad things that go on, the things that are in the back of your head that you're talking bad things about clients about, or other coworkers, or, well, I guess if you're independent, but you know, all those things in the back of your head that you get to do, the water cooler moments at work that you don't get to do in a virtual world. And especially if you're in private practice, you have to find ways to make those water cooler moments. Like, man, I had this one client and you won't believe what this SOB was talking about, right? Even though in the moment you weren't judgmental, right? But afterwards, right, whenever you're talking about it, you can definitely say, or you can be like, this one person came in and they had a goal that they were going to lose 40 pounds in a month, right? They wanted to fit in this wedding dress. Can you believe that, right? Like, you know, things like that, and be able to talk through those types of water cooler moments. I would say set those up with intention, right? And with people that, you know, can understand to talk, right? Because that's really what it's about. To be very judgmental, but but it's true. We have those thoughts, and I think whenever we talk about that unconscious bias and those different things, we always have to keep that in mind, to have those conversations out loud. And if we don't, because remember, the unbiased bias conversation, right, is awareness. And if we're always in our own bubble, in our own private practice, we're not talking to colleagues, you know, again, that's going to be a very challenging thing to overcome, a cognitive bias, if you never talk to anybody about it, our other colleagues. Let's see, any other questions? Because of course I have more. My one question was more about your doctorate. So you said you have your doctorate in health, disease, and prevention, or was it just health promotion?
It's through actually Rocky Mountain, and it's health promotion. So my bachelor's is in physical education and health, and then I have a master's in exercise physiology, and then health promotion and wellness. So kind of always, tapped into it started with the running. I was a high school cross country runner, distance runner. Got on the cross country team, got on the track team, did the 5Ks, 10Ks on a track, which is usually when everybody goes and takes their break or whatever when the 6 miles on a track. And then, just continued to pursue it, and always knew that education is kind of, we're a lifelong learner. So for me, it's really, and knowing myself, it's that if I could give one piece of information, you already know more than enough. So if you enjoy education, fine, go ahead, and obviously we want to stay current and we want to continue to, but enough to help other people. So stop hiding behind the I don't know enough kind of imposter syndrome, and just get out there and fall down with your clients and go forward with that. So
Yeah, that's great advice. So I
Just
thought
need
of
a recording of that.
Say that again, Nicole.
Just need a recording of that so that we can just play it on a daily basis.
You are more than welcome to reach out to me, and I will, we'll feed off of each other all the time. So yes, if that's your glitch, then I got you covered.
You leave like a mentor meeting or a class and you're like, oh, I can do this. There's a possibility. And then, 2 days later, you're like, what am I doing? I can't do this. So like,
absolutely. So just, Nicole, think about yourself and know that, like when we make the sale, yay, I made 10 clients, and then we go 6 months and we're kind of dry. It's that same, it's 80-10-10 rule. 10% of the time we're flying high with, we ate the vegetables, we drank the water, we met the goal. 10% of the time we're in the in the depths of like, oh, I'll never, I'm never going to lose the weight. I'm never going to fit into the dress, for the wedding dress or whatever. I'm never going to get my next client. And then it's 80% is the winter. How we show up and plant our seeds in winter and be able to state regulate during that 80%. 20% of our effort is going to give us 80% of the results. So it's probably as a new entrepreneurial, it's the conversations that we have, the network, the support that we can gain, the conversations that we can have, and the follow-up that we do, that consistency of, putting out there. So enough, you are enough, get out there and, take today's step, have conversations. Even if you have to do it for free, I'm not a big advocate of free, but even just to, practice those conversations with the coffee barista, asking the questions, listening, all those skills that you've learned. If that's where you're at, go for it.
Before I let Todd ask his question, I just want to say I almost feel like the motto for this would be, you know enough, you are enough. That's what I'm taking out of what was just said. You are enough and you know enough, right? So I like that. Go ahead, Todd. Sorry. I just wanted to throw that in there before you.
It's not as much of a question, but just hearing Patricia and Charlie talk, it just reminded me of something, and I've shared this with people before. In a previous life, I was a drill sergeant in the Army. And one of the most pressure-filled events during basic training is what we call basic rifle marksmanship. That's when you take everybody out to the range and they got to qualify. Well, they put a lot of pressure on the drill sergeants to make sure people qualify, because you can't graduate if you don't. Other people would be out there the night before until lights out, until 9-10 o'clock, be drilling people through process and steps. After dinner chow every night before they had to go qualify, I'd take everybody into the barracks, into their bay. I'd sit them down and I'd just basically tell them, trust the process. The Army's been qualifying people since 1775 with a issued weapon. And I'd be willing to bet a lot of the people that have qualified are dumber and worse than you are. That's a little drill sergeant speak. I go, trust the process. The rest of the night is yours. And I'd leave. I had high BRM 3 cycles in a row doing that. And I invite everybody here, you know, trust the process. Understand that it is a process. Knowing part of the process is setbacks. But that's where you get as much of your growth. I mean, if everything was rainbows and unicorns, life wouldn't be any fun.
That's right. That's a great point. And then I also like what you put in the chat too, right? No plan survives the first contact, right? Be prepared to pivot. You know, get out there. You're going to pivot in your business, and put the faith in people like Todd did, right? Give them the confidence, right? You all have the confidence. You got the training. You got everything that's there. And then on top of that, know that you are going to have to pivot while you do it. And you got the resiliency to even survive that as well. You got the skill set, everything. That's a great analogy. Patricia, I think you're muted. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say, thank you, Todd, because that speaks to your, experience as a drill sergeant, that you're bringing in that expertise level, and that you kind of know to empower your clients, your, students, or, whatever that happens to be, but to be able to release and be like, I've done my part, and now it's up to them to just, follow that process. So I love that reminder for, implementation, I guess.
Oh, sorry. Did anybody have anything else?
I just feel like the chat has turned into maybe some t-shirt ideas for the class.
That's right. Trust the
Some
process.
quotes for the class that has turned into that motivational, we maybe all need some branded t-shirts with like, trust the process.
I like it. We'll go ahead and start adding that.
Survives first contact. Be prepared to pivot. Those would be such fun shirts. Okay, that's my.
We'll add that to our budgeting for the next class.
I will say this is probably not a pep talk question, and probably more because another thing that I was asking or trying to get at earlier was, how do you avoid, in particular, working with high functioning athletes in a coaching mindset? How do you avoid not giving advice and things like that, knowing that you're kind of an expert, or not an expert, but the field? I don't know if you are an expert in running, or if you're in that realm, but you know the field, right? You've ran in it, you've competed in it, you've done all those types of things. How do you avoid not giving that advice? And the reason why I'm asking is, we showed one video that really talked about a coach who got a cease and desist for providing nutritional counseling, because that almost goes hand in hand what people think of when they think of health coaching. But I also got me and a colleague in a program that I used to teach for in California sent me another one that was actually a leadership person. Now, this person didn't get a cease and desist, but they are getting sued. They were doing executive coaching and provided our leadership advice to go implement into their organization. Who knows how that advice was really given, but it was a coach. And now that coach is being sued. And, we were talking all different kinds of pieces to that, right? Like, you're getting covered by liability and you're operating under the scope. If you provide advice, is that liability company even going to cover you for your insurance because you then practiced outside of your scope? So there's so many different questions that pose to us of things of why, of other outcomes. But really, from your perspective, or for these students, or for everybody, is really, how do we avoid making recommendations / giving advice, especially whenever we're narrowing down our population into an area that is probably somewhat meaningful to us, meaning that we probably have our opinions, we have our biases going into it, of how people should probably train, or how much they should run, how much they should rest, just for that analogy. But I'm sure whatever you're trying to narrow down your population into, there's an area that you'll be able to provide that advice. How do you avoid it? How do you stop it? How do you make it a conscious thing in your practice and working with runners and things like that? But I think that could be another good conversation of how we can avoid those types of things.
Yeah. I'm assuming you want me to answer.
If you have an answer, because I think it's right, good.
No, I was gonna say, especially if it's an area that you have expertise and passion about, that's when it's the hardest. So a lot of times it's reminding yourself that, it's easier to coach Greek. I don't know anything about Greek, but I can ask a lot of questions and I can find out what the motivating factors are for this individual for this area. But when it becomes something that we are personal, like I know best, if you hear yourself, having that internal conversation in your head while your clients, given ideas, then it's probably a point where you can kind of check yourself. Also, if there are, because there are some areas where it's crossed over, like you might be a personal trainer and a coach. You just need to make sure that you're setting up your boundary. So if you have coaching and business CEO expertise where you're consulting and you're marrying them, you just need to be very clear up front before you get into it that, they both exist within this, or they both don't, and then you have to kind of wrap your head around that. But it's almost easier to, coach on something that's Greek, for lack of a better word, because then you can just, concentrate on the skills and the journey of behavior change that's required. When it becomes something that's personal to you, you're probably hearing that voice in your head, and it's time to make that decision. Is this something that is within scope of practice and something that I've communicated clearly up front prior to having the conversation? And a lot of times, and I'm sure that each of you have your own area of expertise. I think someone had said that they have a counseling background, or I did have an individual who he did reconnaissance. I'm not real sure, but he was in military, and his scope was, transitioning from I set out, I tell people exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it, etc., because lives are at stake. And he had to kind of switch that off and go to a coach approach, client centered. And it was a real transition for him, because he's like, one is life and death, and this is how it needs to be. And the other one is client decision making, helping enable, or helping them through that. So it's really just, kind of having that internal dialogue of like, which role do I need to play in this scenario, and was I clear up front?
I like that part of being clear up front, right? I know we talk about that dual relationship, or not dual relationship, well, that is one piece of it, but those dual certificates that you may have. But even if you don't have a dual certificate, it might be that mindset, right? It's I'm an expert in this. I know this. I've built this, or I've done this, or I've suffered in this way, and that makes me an I hate using the word expert, but just because you're practicing in that, and that's your niche, and that's what you think. A lot of times, whenever you hear that that piece creeping in the back of your head, I'm the expert, or you're hearing it be like, oh, I know they could easily implement this if they implemented this and this in their life right now, or their business, or their personal training, or whatever it is. And then that's the moment that you step outside your scope, and ultimately, some of the conversations that I was having with this other colleague was, again, more of the liability of it. Like, what's the future ramifications for coaching? Because another thing that I'm also want to say is that will only get worse as the field grows. Meaning that if you hold the title coach and you put that in your title, people are going to start honing in on that more. I think I told y'all this whenever we showed the nutritional video, is the nutritionist was the one who told on the coach, right? Not saying that the coach was in the right or wrong, but she was doing nutritional counseling. Well, she was in the wrong. She was doing nutritional counseling, but she was doing nutritional counseling under a coaching certificate. So the dietitians was like, hey, you're messing in our field. So they're the ones who sent the cease and desist letter, right? So I say that to say, as the field grows and we put more parameters around the title coach and who can hold that title, which I think will end up happening in the future, the more likely that you'll see those types of conflicts being emerged, and more cease and desist letters coming out, more lawsuits from patients. What we're gathering from this one patient was basically they told them that you could implement something like this, right? A scenario, and then they went back to their business and implemented it, and then they were fired the next day. So now she filed a lawsuit against that person. Now, granted, I don't know how did they use illicit, provide illicit, did they do the right things and all that type of stuff. We know nothing about the interaction, but I always want to put that out there because I always think that's tough, especially in the same breath that we say we want to narrow down to a topic and a population. Most of the time, we're somewhat emotionally connected to that. And as we learned with unconscious bias, it's emotions that tend to make us make those unconscious decisions that sometimes may or may not be good, right? Based on the client and the perspective of that and a health coaching perspective. So what I kind of heard from Patricia was, being awareness, put boundaries around it, right? And then continuously make it a process, right? Continuously kind of bring it back to the forefront and think about it. And if you do those things, more than likely, hopefully you won't catch yourself in those moments. And if you do, then you can know that you at least did everything in your power to prevent that moment. So if you are getting sued or you are getting stopped or whatever it is, you can literally go in there with your head held high, knowing that you did the right thing. And the only reason I say that is because it's kind of fresh too with that other thing and us not knowing a lot about it. But I do think some things like that can end up, hurting a career. Talk about those gremlins. If you get slapped with a cease and desist and you thought you were doing the right thing the whole time, you're immediately going to be second guessing your entire business strategy, whether you're a coach, all those things. So just to prevent it, create those boundaries, bring awareness, and continuously think about it and bring it to the forefront.
Thanks,
and
Charlie.
Margaret, oh, go ahead.
No. Okay, I was just going to share a personal experience back here in my counseling journey. We have a local counseling group in the church. And then in the last 2 years, we've been having issues with drug addictions amongst the young ones. And each time they bring those kind of clients, one thing I always set aside is I'm not an expert. I don't know how to treat drug addiction. I don't know how to counsel you on drug addiction. So it's okay not to know for me. So I would escalate and look for the experts and say, okay, you need to see maybe a therapist or a psychiatrist or somebody that could really, really help you. What you need is not general counseling. Your son or your partner is into drug addiction. So that led me to go into studying and trying to get into the mental health space. So let me even study and find out how I can help these people. And this is where, it's led me to wellness, health, and all of that. So it's okay not to know, and then you want to know, but don't assume that you know and then get into trouble. Because if you give all of those advice or counsel, and then it goes the other way, you could get into trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I know. I say another piece to that you're saying is know the law, right? I know another thing whenever we showed that video of the nutrition debacle is a lot of times the laws are different in different states, right? You might be working under a national certificate right now, but once you step foot into any state, you then fall into jurisdictions within those states and other things like that too. So you have to know those different pieces too. And if you don't know, don't assume you know, and don't assume it's right. Don't assume it's right. Anyway, thank you for that. That's great insight too, Sade. That's well, let's see. Any other questions? I did want to go back to Margaret's comment, the social / healthcare inflation. Sorry, we got a Amber Alert popping up. Equals more litigation environment, which is just unfortunately, right? We know healthcare is a big place to where, litigation happens on a regular basis. A lot of legal things happen in healthcare because there's lives that are involved in people's livelihoods. So yeah, know the law for sure. Also remember when we talked about it was inappropriate to refer someone to another professional. Talk about it when it is appropriate to refer someone to another professional. There's nothing wrong with referring somebody. I was like, why are you not referring them? I don't understand. But yes,
appropriate.
yeah, you have to, and again, I'll add this too, and you know, maybe this is another thing we talked about, using your own network and things like that, but also have your referral network, right? Have a mental health counseling team that you know of that's local. Have a physical therapy team, right, that you could refer to. Have, you know, whenever you think about the circle of health and you think about those components of self-care, you know, have almost a network in each one of those of professionals that you can refer to, because you're not the expert in those areas. And if it boils down to it that they need an expert and they've crossed over that threshold to be able to refer them, you're not going to be able to refer somebody if you hadn't already thought about it. You're going to be looking in the metaphorical yellow pages. For those people who remember the yellow pages, you're going to be flipping through them trying to find somebody, and you have zero idea if that's a good person. So get to know those people too, right? Make sure that they're doing good services, they're following up, and they align. I'll say this, I don't necessarily feel strongly about this, but make sure they align with your physiological, your philosophy and the way you approach things, not your anatomy. But make sure that they align with the way you think about things, since I can't talk today. But you know, make sure that they align with your philosophy and the way that you practice. Again, if they don't, but at least make sure they're doing evidence-based practicing, right? If it is a traditional medical model and you're like, I don't like that, but they do good work, right? And even tell your clients that. I know we talked about that before, but I think that's very important for people to do, especially in a private practice as you're building your business.
As Charlie said that, it reminds me, I know some of you have talked to me about that initial contract, right? That initial paperwork you sit down with your client and have conversations about beforehand. So a lot of these conversations can happen at the beginning. You know, go ahead and let them know that you may recommend that they go see another professional if it's out of your scope. Go ahead and have those hard conversations up front, so it makes it a much easier transition for them. Something else though, just to keep in mind, I like to have their physical address, where they are when they're meeting with me, as well as an emergency contact. Because in this virtual world, something may be going on with them and they need help right away. You want to have a way of contacting somebody that's close to them that can be there, and also having an address if you need to call 911 for them or whatever needs to happen. We do live in a world where suicidal ideation is a real thing, and they may be having a bad day, and that's not a place you want to be stuck and not have a way to get them help. So just some things I thought of as Charlie was saying that.
I mean, I think bringing up the suicidal piece is huge. And you all know I talk a lot about this space mainly because I sit on a contract, you know, that reports to the White House implementing the national strategy for suicide prevention. And I'll say one of the most important things to remember if you're working with suicidal patients or somebody who's had suicidal ideations, the number one indicator to prevent somebody from committing suicide is lethal means safety. So many times people put in a safety plan to do this coping skill or do that coping skill. Research drastically shows that that is not an appropriate safety plan. The most appropriate safety plan is the golden hour to get somebody the time between stimulus and response, right? I know people's probably heard that saying. It's basically the moment that somebody has said that they're going to kill themselves. If you can create an hour between that time frame, it is, I want to say, I forget the number off the top of my head, but it's like, let's just use 75 because that's a good number, 75% less likely that they'll take action on it. But I want to say it's around 76, 78. It's not quite 80%. So you increase that drastically by creating that golden hour, which means how do you focus on lethal means safety as a health coach? That is upstream mentalities, right? So whenever you really think about upstream mentalities to prevent that moment, think of those moments. And whenever I say upstream, what is the number one upstream thing that you can do whenever you are talking with patients in general is to have a conversation around suicide, have your policy there, have everything there. And in that policy, in my opinion, the number one thing you should focus on is lethal means safety. And in lethal means safety, you can do simple things like tell them to put another big thing that we run into with certain populations is they don't want to lock their guns up for safety, right? They want it out. They still want to do that, which doesn't help with safety. Safety means, or lethal means safety. So the things that you could do for lethal means safety is to have them put a picture of their family on their gun box, right? That's an upstream mentality that you can have a conversation with whenever they're not in crisis, that could have an upstream mentality as a health coach, right? As a health coach, just having the conversation. Are you thinking about suicide? Here goes my policy. If you are thinking about it, here it is. Here goes the 8988 numbers. Here goes, everything that you would need. Having those conversations is the upstream mentality that we should have as health coaches in suicide prevention. And it should be a normal part of our intake conversations and potentially a part of your ongoing conversations, right? Just to be able to ask and then leave it alone, right? If you ask and you say, hey, have you had any thoughts of suicide? If they say no, you can move on. Say, okay, well, good. Well, now we're going to talk about coaching. You want to take a mindful moment before you jump into coaching, right? Or whatever, right? However you want to integrate it, but having the conversation is part of upstream. Doing those types of things are upstream, but also creating resources around where the person is also another upstream mentality, right? And they have that documented somewhere. And you can even talk to them on a regular basis because that's even just coaching in general, right? Just a coaching skill that we talk about their resources, their social connections, their strengths. Like those are upstream mentalities too, but they're not upstream mentalities if we're not talking about it in relation to suicide prevention. So, because they're not going to be thinking that that coping skill that they learned is a strength to get them over that if we did not tell them that that might be a strength that could get them over that moment, right? Or they don't understand the connection between those. And those are the upstream mentalities. That fits into the scope of practice, right? Because we're not trying to provide intervention. We're not trying to do any of those things. We're just facilitating a conversation around suicide prevention. But what was I also going to say about that was the getting their address and those types of things the day that you have a virtual visit with them is a must. In the VA system, it's required. If you don't do it, you would get in a lot of trouble. And in my opinion, they lead the nation in suicide prevention because they have the resources to do it. But that's one of the reasons why is they have those conversations, they do those types of things, and definitely getting the address because they think about it in every interaction they have with somebody. It's on the forefront of every person. So again, getting that and making sure that whenever you have that phone call before you even start, right, we're like, hey, Patricia, where are you located right now? What's the number of the closest person that could get to you, right? And just have it as a normal part of the conversation and not something that's like, because this is what I see a lot of clinicians do, not coaches, is they'll be like, okay, I got to do this suicide prevention screening. I got to get your address and I got to do this. And, they're not making it a normal part of the conversation, right? Because that is not a normal part of a conversation whenever you're rolling your eyes or, even your body language, you're just like, oh, okay, I got to do this. I'm going to ask these same 5 questions. Okay, right. And, again, I'll just say make it part of the conversation as an upstream mentality. And I'll stop talking about that but I think that's important. So thanks, Haley, for bringing that up to virtual visits. You definitely need that plan, but it's also peace of mind for you because what I'll say is this has never happened to me, but there's probably nothing scarier than somebody on the phone or on a Zoom call and they say, I'm going to end my life, and they hang up that Zoom call, right? Like, like, what are you going to do, right? Like, and if you did not have an address or a plan or anything, you're going to feel very, very bad. So, prevent that for yourselves. Back to, I think, Patricia's original point was, know yourself and that self-care mentality, right? Of you're going through the coaching mentality yourself. Like you need to know yourself through that process, and protecting yourself in those moments will also be very helpful. So, all right.
Jennifer just stuck a question in the comment. Do you have any resources around upstream planning or contract examples around suicidal and or lethal means disclosures?
Yeah, I could definitely get some examples to you. But I'd also say the resources is probably going to be unique to your practice as well, because, again, we talked about high functioning people. If you're working with high functioning people, the suicide rate is going to be high. If you're working with, I think we talked about this one day too, whenever you're working with minorities and then you add minority statuses on top of minority statuses, right? The suicide rate gets extremely high whenever you do that. And I'll just use an example. If you take a African American woman who is also LGBTQ population as or identifies in that population, that's 3 minority statuses right there. And the more that you add those up, the suicide risk increases drastically every single time. So I say that you can't, but knowing that also helps you. That's an upstream mentality of just knowing that is also an upstream mentality. But so I would say get to know your population, much like we've talked about, get to know your population, get to know their stressors, but get to know the data behind it sometimes too, right? Because, a lot of times people have no idea really who is the target population that commits to suicide the most. And in reality, it is men aged 55 and older. And most of the time we forget about that too. And that's the highest rate. So if you're working with a man that is 55 years and older and they're getting ready to have their kid leave their home and, anything else that's going on, all those different transitions, is the reason why. I could probably go on a big tangent on why, but there's several reasons, and that's a high risk factor, literally the number one risk factor whenever you start looking at those things. And another thing is whenever we really start talking about suicide prevention, it's really identifying those risk factors, right? But then also increasing those protective factors. So also think of it that way whenever you think of building those resources, is we're trying to reduce those risk factors if we can. Some of them we can't, like I just mentioned, you can't change somebody from being, an African-American female and identifying an LGBTQ. That's out of your control. But what you could control is potentially, the boundaries that you set on the document between you and that client, right? And those types of things. Those are the things that you can control and have those upstream measures identified. Okay. Sorry, Patricia, I know you're probably on limited time and I think we've gone over, but does anybody have any other questions for Patricia? Any other comments?
I think this naturally led to maybe this question. And I'd like to get your insight on it, but what are some of the things that you do to help prevent potentially taking on the emotions of the client if it's something deep? Or what do you do to prevent burnout for yourself with coaching?
As I frame connection ports for yourself first, so as you're building your business coaching practice, whatever it happens to be, look at your connection ports. So, and it's not necessarily the to-do list or, like I have to exercise, I have to do this or whatever, but it's the things that truly bring you joy, and schedule that in as a top priority. So you need to kind of, again, it goes back to knowing yourself, knowing what brings you joy, and schedule those in, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever that happens to be. So that's one thing. And then it's really kind of the framework of setting up not only that 30 minutes or 60 minutes or whatever that you're doing with the client, even the 5 minutes before, 5 minutes after, it's the other 23 hours or the release in between clients if you have them stacked. So being able to think about what measures you need to do. So you may frame it as, a heavier coaching day and then an administrative day, because it may be harder to task shift, within a business type setting. So if you're doing a lot of coaching, you might have Tuesdays as your coaching day and then Wednesday as your social connection day or something like that. So it's things like that you're thinking of. But I'd say going back to connection ports for you as an individual, and that goes back to what's your VIA, what's your strengths, what brings you joy, and tapping into that and scheduling it out, knowing that that's part of the process. I will say that, with the whole conversation for suicide prevention, nutrition, counseling, the drug addictions, et cetera, you're really tapping into competencies 3.0 within the health framework, that as a coach, and I can almost see where kind Todd and Haley can create a continuing education class on, you know, this upstream, downstream for, you know, how coaches can, you know, to support them in that implementation. So I could see a continuing ed class around that type of framework. But to look at that, whatever, you know, sleep, drug addiction, diabetes prevention, whatever it happens to be able to know what are the red flags, what are the things that we need to know, you know, blood pressure, whatever it happens to be, and building our skills. We don't need to be experts in them, but we need to, you know, continue to dive into the best evidence-based information and, you know, going back to that elicit, provide, elicit. Tell me about your thoughts around XYZ. What do you already know about XYZ? You know, is it okay if I share? You know, asking permission, things like that. So just really diving into that. So thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm excited to, you know, see new faces that are diving into coaching, and I know it's graduation time for you guys, so I know it's just the launch pad, and you're going to do great things as your careers take off. So thank you.
Thank you for being here today and taking the time to answer questions and give your insights, because it's really helpful. They hear myself, Charlie, Todd, they hear us all day, every day saying what we're saying, but it's nice to have other voices come in and give some insight. So we really appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come and share what little knowledge I can add to the conversation, but I'm excited for each of you all, because it just brings passion to be like, oh, here's another group that are going after it, and you know enough, you are enough. Please reach out. You know who I am. If you want to make a connection, you just kind of plant the seeds and get after it. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, thank you so much for being here. This was awesome. Oh, actually, Tom, stand up. Sorry.
I just wanted to build on something that Patricia said. You know, that balance piece is critically important. And the other thing, I got 8 coaches that work for me. And with our clientele in the VA, they oftentimes hear the things that Haley alluded to. And, you know, the coach will come to me and they'll be expressing that. And I'll just reflect back. You held the pace. You held that space for another human being. I'll reflect. The greatest gift you can give somebody is truly listen to understand. It's that perspective and shift that truly coaching can be empowering. It can lift things off your shoulders, and that you know, that acceptance piece, that I can accept that I can be here. I can hear what this person's saying and what they went through. I don't have to take it all in. I mean, I don't have to make it mine, but I can allow them to it's that slight little shift with that can really allow you to go with that. But the balance is important, scheduling, having time between patients and stuff too. But I mean, I know when I've experienced those sessions where people, you know, have trusted me enough to say things, it's it's empowering for me. It makes me feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah. I love the reflection aspect of it during the session, because it's basically the mirror, you know, that and sometimes it's the water where it's a little murky at first and you want it to kind of get a little clearer for them. And that's the same mirror that we hold out to ourselves when we're offering reflection. So that's holding that space for our clients is a lovely image for how to reset and, you know, just know that we can have that space for them.
Do you have a website for your business that we could know and explore?
I do not. You could go and find one, but it hasn't been updated for eon. So I'm a non-web website individual at the moment. So primarily doing education stuff. So all of my clients are hidden in the virtual world at the moment.
Is
And Nicole,
there,
I'll say I was gonna show the website that I just built not too long ago and kind of walk everybody through how to build it.
Already explored your website.
Okay.
is there a
Using
email
that.
that you prefer if they were to want to reach out to you?
Yeah. ooh.
Not to put you on the spot.
I'm going through all of my emails. You can get on Facebook and you can find Dr. Trish. That'd probably be the easiest, or even with Instagram. So I'm kind of Dr. Trish everywhere. So if you kind of Google me, you'll see that. And you can just kind of friend me and let me know how I know. You just say, hey, with Haley and Charlie, we kind of met, and then I'll know if you're that you're legit.
You're not a
Dr.
troll.
Remind me. I need lots of I always told Haley when we were doing, I can do it. I just need reminders because girl brain here, but I just need the reminders for like, how do I know? Paint the picture for me. So repetitive redundancy, doing the same thing over and over works well for me. So yeah, it's the different learning styles from the dyslexia version. So
All right. Well, we appreciate you so much again. Thank you so much. And I know you gotta jump
yeah,
in.
congratulations. Thank you, Haley and Charlie, for inviting me in. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, everyone. It's been a joy, and I look forward to making connections. So all the best, and I will click out. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Charlie, do you feel like